He is the chief counsel for the American Center for Law and Justice, also counsel to the president. Jay Sekulow is with us. I read what your organization has put out, a lot of what we've been saying here on this program. Yep. Let's get your general impression first.
Well, I think, first of all, the memo, which purportedly was done to challenge the credibility of the Nunes memo, actually fails to do so. And, in fact, it ends up supporting the four major contentions. The first, the Steele dossier was, in fact, the key to the FISA warrant application. Second, the FISA warrant application did hide the dossier's connection to the Clintons and the DNC. Third, the FISA warrant application relied on Steele's, quote, credibility rather than verifying and corroborating the credibility of his information or his informants. And fourth, remember those statements by Adam Schiff when he was so outraged that Devin Nunes made the statement that Andrew McCabe testified privately in the House Intel Committee that no surveillance warrant would have even been sought from the FISA court without the Steele dossier information, and he was going to refute that in his memo. He doesn't even mention it. Does not even mention it.
Well, to me, isn't that almost by omission lying to a judge? I mean, it's such a critical... I mean, I can't imagine. Let me put it this way. Could you imagine any judge approving a bought and paid for dossier of an opposition party candidate against another and approving that?
Especially not in a FISA court where it's surveillance against an American citizen, no. And the way they eat and Schiff in his memo quotes this footnote that was in the FISA application that when you read the footnote, it is so outrageous. It talks about party one and candidate one and this. Instead of just telling the judge, hey, this is what we got, this is what it means, this is what we're dealing with, they didn't do that. So I don't know what the point of the Adam Schiff memo was. I notice it's not getting a lot of coverage on some of the other networks, let's say, and I think it's because it delivered zero.
Well, I think it delivered zero, and yeah, they're ignoring it because I think it actually works back in both the favor of the Nunes memo. What are the implications now in terms of what happens from here? I would imagine at some point one of these four FISA judges is going to be paying attention to it because it's now in the public domain, and I've got to imagine that some of them would be pretty pissed off. I know I would be. I mean, would you expect that?
How about the fact that Carter Page was under a FISA warrant for almost a year, and there were never a charge or anything else brought? I mean, no one's talking about that.
Well, Carter Page is on my TV show tonight. What would you ask him if you were me?
I'd ask him, I said, how do you feel as an American citizen that knowing you were surveilled by a foreign intelligence surveillance warrant for a year, and you've been vindicated because nothing happened? No charges brought, nothing. Now,
I don't even think the guy has a lawyer, does he?
I don't know. I have not had contact with him in that context, so I don't know. But I do know this, that if you look at the way in which in the Schiff memo, they try to de-escalate the obvious, and I say de-escalate the obvious. When it comes to the funding, you mentioned that, no disclosure to the FISA court judge as to what took place here. Here, let me just read a couple of sentences of this. DOJ, this is what they disclosed, indicates source one, that a U.S.-based law firm had hired an identified U.S. person to conduct research regarding candidate number one's ties to Russia. Then it says the unidentified U.S. person and source one have a long-standing business relationship. You notice what's not in here? The identified U.S. person hired source one to conduct this research. The identified U.S. person never advised source one as to the motivation behind the research into the candidate number one's ties to Russia. In other words, it didn't disclose that it was bought and paid for by the Hillary Clinton campaign and the DNC. Doesn't disclose that it was opposition research. Doesn't disclose that it was paid for by the DNC. So, and then the so-called credibility of Christopher Steele, they conveniently ignore, I guess, in the later warrants that they fired him because he was leaking information to the press. And what's the secondary source on the basis upon which they corroborate the Steele dossier? The Michael Isikoff report, which is all that is. And Michael Isikoff said this. He goes, all I did was do a report on the dossier.
By the way, yeah, exactly. All he did was
prophecy.
Well, they were weren't they trying in that instance to present to the court as though these were two separate corroborations of the main point? Isn't that misleading in and of itself?
Yes. Let me tell you what else is misleading here. And Schiff memo stresses that at the time the FISA surveillance of Carter Page began, he was no longer with the Trump campaign. What the memo doesn't say is that the surveillance enabled the FBI to intercept not only his forward-going communications,
everything,
but as our friend Andy McCarthy pointed out so well, but also any stored email in Texas that he might have had. So it allows you to look forward and look back.
What was Carter Page's role in the campaign anyway? He was just an informal advisor, wasn't he?
Yeah, and everybody's acting like they don't know how campaigns work, where you have these committees that have people with various expertise, and they serve on them as voluntary, they're unpaid, and they're informal advisors, or they're part of a committee of advisors. Every campaign has them. Yeah.
Here's what I look at, too. Now, the Democrats made a big deal over, Andy McCabe in December didn't say, in fact, that if there's no dossier, there's no attempt at a FISA warrant. They didn't even address it when they were acting so outraged over the Nunes memo. The other thing, and I think this is very key, how is it possible that the Democratic memo doesn't contain a single reference to the DNC or the Clinton campaign when they paid for this? They never acknowledged the funding of the dossier. Now, to me, that has to be key.
Because it would be, we don't want to get into, are you ready for this? Is laughable. We didn't want to get into unauthorized unmasking. I mean, that is seriously, Sean, what they said. That would require, that's what some of the committee members said, that will require us to get into unauthorized unmasking. By the way, coming from the specialists in unmasking, which, by the way, this has nothing to do
How is that unmasking? If they didn't have a problem talking about candidate 1, they could have mentioned candidate 2 paid for it all.
Right.
So I don't believe that is. Now, also, the memo, the Democrats' memo, ignores the fact that the DNC and the Hillary campaign paid for it. Not only did they not mint, but they paid for it, which changes, I think, the entire narrative about this, because it seems to me that there was at least a conspiracy here to mislead a judge. Do you believe that those are charges that could be brought?
I think it needs to be looked at, because I think these judges operate in good faith. They turned down the initial FISA warrants. They were turned down. It took getting the Steele dossier to bolster it up.
Would it have been important to point out that Page was cooperating with the FBI?
I think that would have been certainly relevant to the inquiry of the judge.
Okay, now let's go back to the big picture issue here. So the warrants are granted. A lot of information is withheld from the FISA court judges, both the initial application and the 3 renewals. Now, how does this impact the Trump-Russia investigation? Because to date, we have no evidence of any collusion. The charges that have been brought up in this case have nothing to do with any Trump-Russia collusion. I've seen no evidence ever in the media of Trump-Russia collusion, although they keep saying there's smoke, but there's no fire. I have Democrat after Democrat, including Maxine Waters, including Dianne Feinstein, including Joe Manchin, and many others saying there is no evidence of any collusion. And it's been over a year. The country literally now it has put handcuffs on an administration. When does it all end?
Well, I hope it, look, I don't predict ending dates. As I've said before, and I'll say it again as the president's lawyer, this has been the most transparent response to an inquiry in U.S. history. I mean, this president authorized the turning over of literally tens of thousands of documents where he could have asserted forms of executive privilege or attorney-client privilege on other matters, and he did not. And then you have witnesses that were testified again, no executive privilege asserted. So it's been the most transparent. And that should bode well for the fact for the American people to know the president's been transparent, continues to be transparent on this. But as you just said, Sean, the collusion aspect of this, and let's just be blunt. The indictments last week on the Russia companies and the 13 Russian individuals showed one thing very clearly, and that was that the Trump campaign was not a witting participant in any of this, nor anybody associated with the campaign. So far, there has been no evidence of collusion, and that's because there isn't any collusion.
What about the July 2016 trip to Moscow by Carter Page and your take on it? Although there's never been any evidence that the people that he's been accused of meeting with that he ever met with.
Right, that's right. So based on what I know, that's exactly correct. So and that he had other business interests over there, as many businesses do, and that's what he was engaged in. So again, I don't want to get in particulars on that. I can't, but I will say this: that they've had a year and a half now, almost 2 years to look at it. They had him under surveillance for a year, and nothing. You don't see Carter Page in these indictments.
Let's talk about what should happen here if a FISA warrant is obtained by purposely withholding very important information from a judge. What does it mean about all the information that they might have gotten from the FISA warrant? Does that render it all,
Well, it's called the doctrine of the fruit of the poisonous tree, and that is if the underlying basis upon which you obtain the evidence is unlawful, the evidence then you obtain is not admissible. It's called the fruit of the poisonous tree. So you run into those things here.
Wouldn't that likely impact somebody like General Michael Flynn?
Well, that's an interesting question because what is General Flynn pled guilty to? He pled guilty to a one-count felony, lying to an FBI agent. So, for what he was charged with, what the allegations were two different things. So, again, pleas don't mean, when you do a plea, it doesn't mean that his lawyers negotiated a plea with the Office of Special Counsel, so that's how they ended up with that. So that's part of what happens in pleas, and you saw that last week with the Rick Gates plea. Again, pleading to what? One-count felony, and on one-count felony of making a false statement, and then the other felony count that was more within the scheme of what they were doing. So again, that's where those have lied. Again, and anybody that's been indicted or issued a plea, none of those individuals, what they pled to or what's been alleged that they did, had anything to do with the Trump campaign or the president.
Well, at that point, then you would think that this would all come to a sudden halt here. All right, got to take a quick break. We'll come back more with Jay Sekulow on the other side. All right, as we continue, Jay Sekulow, Chief Counsel, American Center for Law and Justice, and also counsel to the president. The president was very clear that we still to this day don't know where the DNC email hack came from. I think I'm one of the few people in America, Jay, that actually took the time to interview Julian Assange, and I went to the Ecuadorian embassy and interviewed him for TV, and I met him and I asked him, and every radio interview I've had and that TV interview that I had, he adamantly denies that this information came from Russia or from any state at all. To me, doesn't that get to the heart of if it didn't come from there, wouldn't it be smart of the special counsel and everybody else investigating this to have a conversation with the guy that would know?
Well, I'm not going to advise the Bob Mueller's office on who they should or should not interview because that would be inappropriate for me as the president's lawyer. But I will say this. I think that, again, when it comes to this whole idea of collusion or attempts to collusion, they just didn't exist. And the evidence has shown that, and the police have shown that, and the documentation has shown that. What is uncontrovertible here is the fact that on this memo from Adam Schiff trying to basically reboot or reignite a debate on the initial memo from Nunes, that just fell flat because they couldn't answer the critical question. He was on Jake Tapper the other day, and Tapper asked him directly, would have they gotten the memo? Without the memo, would have they gotten the dossier? Without the dossier, would have they gotten the warrant? And he said, well, I really can't say. Now, this was from a guy that was 2 weeks before that or 3 weeks before that, denying that it was even said by Andrew McCabe. So, these things have a way of, I'll call them maturing over time, and I think you're starting to see the maturing over time.
I don't think I've been wrong about any of this yet, and we've been way ahead of the curve, and the media has about as much egg on their face as I think you could ever have, as they have gone out on a limb and again and said things that, number one, we had no evidence to back up, and it's been all speculation and conspiracy theories. I just hope for the sake of this country this goes away, but not only goes away, but those people that are involved in potential crimes surrounding the issue, that we need, if we're going to have a surveillance court, a FISA law in this country, we better respect people's Fourth Amendment rights against unreasonable search and seizure. Because this is a constitutional issue now, and clearly, if you are able to use a paid-for political dossier to get a FISA warrant and not tell the judge the truth, that is beyond problematic. You can't even have that law work ever under those circumstances, because now we're criminalizing political differences.
Well, that's right. And when you're utilizing a FISA court to do it, you're dealing with the most sensitive, and it's American citizens involved. You've got to be very, very careful, and they weren't.
All right, Jay Sekulow, we appreciate you being with us.